The old space station floated in the dark between stars. Kepler Station was huge, made of metal and glass that caught the light from distant suns. Ships came and went every day, bringing people from all over the galaxy to trade and do business. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window of his transport ship. He had never seen anything like this place before. The station was bigger than any city he knew back home on Earth. Lights blinked along its surface like a giant Christmas tree spinning slowly in space. "First time seeing Kepler Station?" asked Danny Webb, the ship's pilot. Danny was a short man with gray hair who had been flying between planets for 20 years. He laughed at Jake's wide eyes. "Wait until you see what's inside." Jake nodded but kept looking out the window. He was just a mining engineer from New Terra, one of Earth's outer colonies. His job was simple. He fixed the big machines that dug rare crystals out of asteroid rocks. Nothing fancy, nothing special, just hard work with his hands and basic tools. Their ship, the New Frontier, was small and old. The paint was chipped and the engines made funny noises. But it got them where they needed to go. Today, that was Kepler Station, where Jake hoped to make a deal for mining rights in this part of space. "Docking Bay 7, came a voice over the radio. It sounded strange, not quite human. "Welcome to Kepler Station." As they flew closer, Jake could see other ships docked along the station's arms. Some looked like Earth ships, smooth and white with blue markings. Others were completely different. One ship looked like it was made of living coral. Another seemed to be just a ball of silver liquid floating in space. "Those are alien ships," said Lisa Park, their navigator. She was a smart woman who knew about different species across the galaxy. "That coral one belongs to the reef people. They grow their ships instead of building them. And that silver ball? That's a fluid ship from the Mercury folk." Jake had heard about aliens, of course, everyone had. But seeing their ships up close made his heart beat faster. He was really here, in a place where beings from dozens of different worlds came together. The docking went smooth. Danny had done this many times before. Soon they were walking through an airlock and into the station itself. Jake's mouth fell open. The main corridor was wide enough to fit a whole building inside. The ceiling was so high he could barely see it. Beings of all shapes and sizes walked, crawled, and floated past them. Some looked almost human but with blue skin or extra arms. Others were so strange Jake couldn't figure out which end was the front. A tall being with 4 legs and fur like a lion walked by, talking to a small robot that beeped in response. 2 creatures that looked like giant butterflies with rainbow wings flew overhead. Near a shop selling glowing crystals, a group of rock-like beings stood perfectly still, making sounds like grinding stones. "Don't stare," Lisa whispered. It's considered rude in most cultures, but Jake couldn't help himself. Back on New Terra, the most exciting thing was when the supply ship came once a month. Here, every step brought something new and amazing. They found rooms in the cheap part of the station. The beds were too small and the food dispenser only had 3 flavors, but Jake didn't care. After dinner, Danny suggested they go to Murphy's Bar, a place that served both humans and aliens. Murphy's Bar was dark and smoky. The air tasted of strange spices and metal. Most of the customers were human, but Jake saw several aliens sitting at tables in the back. The bartender was a big man with a thick beard who looked like he could arm wrestle a mining robot. "What, can I get you boys?" Murphy asked in a voice like gravel. Danny ordered beer for all 3 of them. They found a table near the wall and sat down to watch the crowd. Jake was happy just to listen to all the different languages and sounds around him. That's when he heard someone mention her name. "Zarakith," said a man at the next table. He was talking to 2 other humans, both wearing the blue uniforms of the merchant fleet. "Been here over 100 years, they say, still offering that same crazy challenge." "What challenge?" asked one of his friends. "You don't know?" "Anyone brave enough to spend 1 night in her chamber gets access to Void Walker technology. Stuff that could change everything, faster than light travel that doesn't need fuel, weapons that can cut through any armor, machines that think faster than computers." Jake leaned closer, trying to hear better. "But here's the catch," the man continued. Nobody's ever survived a night with her. Not one person in over a century. What happens to them? Asked the second friend. They go in at sunset. By morning, they're dead. Sometimes the bodies look normal, like they just stopped breathing. Other times, the man shook his head. Other times, there's not much left to find. Danny noticed Jake, listening, and poked him with his elbow. Don't even think about it, he said quietly. But Jake was thinking about it. He couldn't help himself. His whole life he had been the guy who fixed things that were broken. When other people said something couldn't be repaired, Jake found a way. It was just how his mind worked. Who is she? Jake asked the man at the next table. This Zarakith? The man turned around. He had tired eyes and old scars on his hands. Void Walker, he said. They're an old race, older than humans, older than most species in the galaxy. They can do things with their minds that would drive you crazy just thinking about it. I heard she's the last one left, added his friend. Her whole species died out or disappeared or something. She just sits in that chamber waiting for someone to take her challenge. What kind of people have tried? Jake asked. All kinds. Warriors from the Krill Empire. Those are big lizard folk who can rip steel apart with their bare hands. Mind readers from the Mentari Federation. Even some kind of robot that couldn't feel fear. All dead. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. I know that look, she said. Whatever you're thinking, stop thinking it. But Jake's mind was already working. What could kill such different types of beings? What was in that chamber that could defeat both warriors and machines? And why did this Zarakith keep offering the challenge if everyone died? The man at the next table was still talking. Station security won't stop you from trying. They figure if you're stupid enough to walk into certain death, that's your choice. But they make you sign papers first saying it's not their fault when you don't come back. Where is this chamber? Jake found himself asking. Level 15, Section C. Big black door with warning signs in about 50 languages. You can't miss. The man studied Jake's face. You're not seriously thinking about it, are you? Look, friend, I've been around the galaxy a few times. I've seen brave people and smart people and people with more firepower than a battle fleet. They all went into that room thinking they were special. They all came out dead. Jake nodded, but he wasn't really listening anymore. His engineer's mind was turning the problem over and over. There had to be an answer. There always was if you looked at it the right way. Danny finished his beer and stood up. Come on, he said. We've got meetings tomorrow. We need sleep, not crazy stories about death chambers. As they walked back to their rooms, Lisa kept giving Jake worried looks. She knew him well enough to see when an idea had gotten stuck in his head. Promise me you won't do anything stupid, she said as they reached their doors. I won't do anything stupid, Jake said. But even as he said it, he was thinking about that black door on level 15. Somewhere behind it was a mystery that had puzzled the galaxy for over a century, and Jake Morrison had never met a puzzle he couldn't solve. Jake couldn't sleep that night. He lay on the small bed in his room staring at the ceiling and thinking about what he had heard in the bar. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that black door on level 15. When morning came, he was all ready, dressed and ready to go. Danny and Lisa were waiting for him in the corridor, both looking worried. You didn't sleep much, did you? Lisa asked. I'm fine, Jake said, but his voice sounded tired. They went to the business district to meet with the mining companies. The meetings were boring. Lots of talk about contracts and percentages and shipping costs. Jake tried to pay attention, but his mind kept wandering. During lunch break, he excused himself and took the elevator down to level 15. The corridor was quieter here. Most of the shops and offices were on the upper levels. Jake walked slowly, checking the section numbers on the walls. C1, C2, C3. He found it at the end of the corridor. The door was bigger than he expected, made of some kind of black metal that seemed to absorb light. Warning signs covered the walls around it in dozens of different languages and symbols. Jake could read the English ones. Danger, authorized personnel only, and warning, high risk of death. But it was the small sign next to the door that caught his attention. It was written in simple text, Trial Night Challenge, C Station. Administrator Kexlon for details. Jake stood there for a long time just looking at the door. He had expected to feel scared, but instead he felt curious. What was behind there? What had killed so many people? You are thinking about it. Jake jumped and spun around. A tall being stood behind him, so quiet he hadn't heard it approach. The creature looked almost human, but wrong in ways that made Jake's eyes hurt to focus on. Its skin was pale gray and seemed to move slightly, like water. Its eyes were completely black, like holes in space. "You're her," Jake said. It wasn't a question. "I am Zarakith," the being said. Her voice sounded like wind blowing through empty rooms. "And you are thinking about accepting my challenge." "Maybe," Jake said. "I'm curious about what's in there." Zarakith moved closer. Jake felt cold, like standing near an open freezer. Other people in the corridor seemed to avoid looking at her, walking quickly past with their heads down. "You are different from the others," she said, studying his face. "The warriors come seeking glory. The scholars come seeking knowledge. The merchants come seeking profit. What do you seek?" Jake thought about it. "I guess I want to understand what's happening, why everyone dies." This seemed to surprise her. She tilted her head, and for a moment she looked almost confused. "You wish to understand death?" "I wish to understand the problem," Jake said. "I fix things for a living. When something's broken, I figure out why and I fix it. Maybe what's happening in there isn't supposed to kill people. Maybe something's just broken." Zarakith stared at him for a long moment. Then she made a sound that might have been laughter, but it sounded like breaking glass. "Broken," she repeated. "Yes, perhaps you are correct." Before Jake could ask what she meant, she was gone. He looked around, but she had vanished as quietly as she had appeared. Jake went back to his meetings, but he couldn't concentrate. His mind kept returning to what Zarakith had said. Something was broken. But what? That evening, he told Danny and Lisa what he was thinking. "Absolutely not," Danny said immediately. They were sitting in their small common room sharing a dinner of processed food from the station's dispensers. "Jake, this is crazy," Lisa added. 100 years of people trying and dying. What makes you think you can succeed where everyone else failed?" "I don't know if I can," Jake admitted, "but I think maybe everyone's been approaching it wrong." "How so?" Lisa asked. Jake stood up and started pacing, the way he did when he was working through a difficult problem. "Think about it. Warriors, scholars, telepaths, robots. They all went in expecting a fight or a test or a puzzle to solve. But what if that's not what it is?" "Then what is it?" Danny asked. "I don't know yet. But Zarakith said something was broken. What if the challenge isn't working the way it's supposed to? What if people are dying because something needs to be fixed?" Lisa shook her head. "That's a big risk to take on, maybe." "Everything's a risk," Jake said. "Back home, going into the mines is a risk. Flying between planets is a risk, but we do it anyway because someone has to." Danny leaned forward. "Jake, you've got family on New Terra. Your sister, your nephew. What happens to them if you die in that room?" That made Jake pause. He did think about his family. His sister Mary worked in the hydroponic farms growing food for the colony. His nephew Tommy was only 8 years old, always asking Jake to fix his broken toys when Jake visited. "They'd be sad," Jake said quietly. "But they'd understand. They know I can't leave a problem unsolved." "This isn't a broken mining drill," Lisa said. "This is something that's killed champions and heroes." "Maybe that's the problem," Jake said. "Maybe it doesn't need champions and heroes. Maybe it needs someone who knows how to fix things." The next morning, Jake went to see Station Administrator Kexlon. The administrator's office was on level 5 in the government district. Kexlon was one of the spider-like arachnid people, with 8 legs and 4 arms. She was busy typing on multiple computer screens at once. "Mr. Morrison," she said without looking up. "I heard you might be coming to see me." "Word travels fast here," Jake said. "When someone spends time staring at Zarakith's door, people notice." Kexlon finally looked at him with her cluster of black eyes. You want to attempt the trial night? Yes. Kexalon stopped typing. All four of her hands came together in front of her. Mr. Morrison, in my 40 years as administrator of this station, I have processed 63 applications for the trial night. 63 beings have entered that chamber. 0 have emerged alive. She pulled up a holographic display showing pictures of some of the previous challengers. Jake saw the Krillian warrior, a huge lizard-like being covered in natural armor. There was a Mentari sage with a large brain visible through translucent skin, an android with glowing blue eyes, a creature that looked like living crystal. These were not ordinary beings. Kexalon continued. Commander Veltar of the Krill Empire could tear through steel doors with his bare claws. Sage Mindleton could read thoughts from across a star system. Android Unit ZX7 had no fear programming and could process 1,000,000 calculations per second. The Crystal Monk resonant node could survive in the vacuum of space. What happened to them? Jake asked. We don't know. The chamber is sealed during the trial. We only enter after sunrise the next day. Kexalon showed him more images. Medical, reports and scene photos. Sometimes they appear to have died peacefully as if they simply stopped living. Other times, she showed him a photo of twisted metal and crystal fragments. Other times there is very little left. Jake studied the pictures. Has anyone ever asked Zarakith what happens in there? Many have tried. She only says that the trial tests what the challenger values most. She claims she does not directly harm anyone. But they all die anyway. Yes. Kexalon leaned back in her chair. Mr. Morrison, I must ask, what makes you believe you can succeed where all these powerful beings failed? Jake was quiet for a moment. I don't know if I can, he said finally. But I think maybe they were all trying to beat something that wasn't meant to be beaten. Sometimes when a machine isn't working, it's not because it's broken. Sometimes it's because someone's been using it wrong. Kexalon made a clicking sound that Jake thought might be laughter. You think the trial night is being used incorrectly? I think maybe everyone's been treating it like a combat test or an intelligence test. What if it's something else entirely? Such as? I don't know yet, but I'd like to find out. Kexalon was quiet for a long time, studying Jake with her multiple eyes. Finally, she opened a drawer and pulled out a thick stack of papers. These are the legal documents, she said. Liability waivers, next of kin notifications, consent forms. If you sign these, the station is not responsible for your death. Your crew will not be allowed to interfere once the trial begins, and if you die, your body becomes property of the station for research purposes. Jake took the papers and started reading. The legal language was complicated, but it all said the same thing. If he did this, he was completely on his own. I need some time to think, he said. Of course, but Mr. Morrison, if you decide to go through with this, I recommend you do it soon. Word is spreading that a human is considering the challenge. There are betting pools starting on the commercial levels. Some beings might try to talk you out of it. Others might try to convince you to do it for their entertainment. Jake nodded and left the office with the papers under his arm. As he walked back through the station, he noticed aliens watching him. Some pointed and whispered, others just stared. By the time he reached his room, Danny and Lisa were waiting for him. They had heard the news too. The whole station's talking about it, Lisa said. They're calling you either the bravest human alive or the stupidest. What do you think? Jake asked. Danny and Lisa looked at each other. Finally, Danny spoke. I think you're going to do it no matter what we say. So if you're determined to get yourself killed, at least tell us why. Jake sat down on his bed and looked at his friends. They had been with him for 3 years, flying from planet to planet, working the mining contracts that nobody else wanted. Jake signed the papers that afternoon. Danny and Lisa tried one last time to change his mind over dinner, but Jake's decision was final. He had spent his whole life fixing things that seemed impossible to fix. This was just another problem that needed solving. At least take some equipment with you, Lisa said. A scanner, a communicator, something. The rules say I can only bring what I normally carry, Jake replied. He patted his tool belt. Basic tools, flashlight, emergency kit. Same stuff I take into the mines. Mining equipment won't help you against whatever killed all those warriors, Danny said. Maybe not. But it might help me understand what's really happening in there. Word had spread quickly through the station. By evening, crowds of aliens and humans had gathered on level 15 to watch Jake approach the black door. Some carried cameras. Others placed bets on how long he would last. Station. Administrator Kexlon was there with a medical team and security guards. She looked worried as she handed Jake the final forms to sign. "Last chance to change your mind, Mr. Morrison," she said. Jake looked around at all the faces watching him. Some looked excited, like they were watching a sporting event. Others seemed sad, like they were attending a funeral. A few aliens were making clicking and whistling sounds that his translator couldn't process. "I'm ready," Jake said. Kexalon nodded to the security guards. They began entering codes into the door's control panel. Jake noticed that it took 3 different keys and 2 separate authorization codes to open the door. Whatever was inside, the station took it very seriously. The black door slid open with a soft hiss. Beyond it was darkness so complete that Jake's flashlight beam seemed to disappear after only a few feet. "The door will seal at sunset," Kexalon announced. "It will not open again until sunrise, exactly 12 hours from now. Mr. Morrison, are you certain you wish to proceed?" Jake stepped forward. The air coming from the chamber felt cold and somehow heavy, like breathing underwater, but he had made his choice. "See you in the morning," he said to Danny and Lisa. Then he walked into the darkness. The door sealed behind him with a final click. Jake stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. The chamber was bigger than he had expected, much bigger. His flashlight showed walls that curved away into shadows, but he couldn't see the ceiling or the far end of the room. The floor was smooth and black, like polished stone. "Hello," he called out. His voice echoed strangely, as if the room was both very large and very small at the same time. For a moment, nothing happened. Then light began to grow in the center of the chamber. It wasn't normal light. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, making his shadow point in multiple directions at once. Zarakith sat in the middle of the light, cross-legged on the floor. Around her floated dozens of crystal shapes that pulsed with inner fire. She looked different here than she had in the corridor. More solid, but also more alien. Her skin moved like liquid, and her black eyes reflected the crystal light like mirrors. "You came," she said. Her voice sounded surprised. "I said I would." Jake walked closer, his boots making no sound on the strange floor. "So this is where it happens. This is where they all died, yes." Zarakith gestured to the crystals floating around her. "Each crystal holds the memory of one who attempted the trial. 63 memories of fear, pain, and failure." Jake stopped about 10 feet away from her. Up close, he could see that the crystals weren't just floating. They were moving in complex patterns like planets orbiting a star. "What exactly is the trial?" he asked. Zarakith looked at him with those black eyes. "You will experience what I experience. You will feel what I feel. You will know what it means to be the last of your kind, alone in a universe that no longer has a place for you. And that kills people? Not directly. But the weight of cosmic loneliness, the knowledge of ultimate meaninglessness, the understanding that everything you love will die while you remain." She gestured to the crystals. "Most minds cannot bear such knowledge." Jake sat down on the floor, facing her. This surprised Zarakith. All the others had remained standing, ready to fight or run. "So you're lonely," Jake said. "That sucks." Zarakith blinked. Of all the responses she had expected, casual sympathy was not one of them. "I am the last Void Walker," she continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "My people lived for millions of years. We saw the birth and death of entire galaxies. We watched species evolve from primitive animals to star-traveling civilizations, then fade away like sparks in the night. That must have been hard," Jacob said. He was looking around the chamber now, his engineer's mind taking in details. The walls weren't solid. They seemed to shift and flow like water. The ceiling disappeared into infinite darkness. How long have you been alone? 10,000 years. Since the last of my kind chose to fade into the void rather than continue existing in an empty universe. Why didn't you go with them? This question seemed to catch Zarakith off guard. The crystals around her pulsed brighter for a moment. I could not accept that everything was meaningless. I believed there must be someone somewhere who could understand, someone who could bear the weight of cosmic knowledge without breaking. Jake nodded. So you've been testing people for 10,000 years, hoping to find someone who won't go crazy when they understand how big and lonely the universe is. Yes. But you keep killing them instead. I do not kill them. Zarakith's voice rose, and the chamber seemed to shake. I simply show them truth. If they cannot handle truth, that is not my fault. Jake held up his hands peacefully. Okay. You don't kill them directly. But showing someone something that drives them crazy is still pretty dangerous, don't you think? The shaking stopped. Zarakith looked confused again. I never considered it from that perspective. Right. So here's what I think is happening. Jake stood up and started walking around the chamber the way he did when he was working through a problem. You've been alone for 10,000 years. You're desperate to find someone who can understand what you've been through, but you're so focused on testing whether they can handle the big cosmic stuff that you're overwhelming them right from the start. He stopped in front of one of the floating crystals. Inside, he could see swirling images, a Krillian warrior screaming, as his mind broke under the weight of infinite loneliness. This guy, Jake said, pointing at the crystal. He was a soldier, right? Used to following orders, fighting enemies he could see and touch. You hit him with the concept of eternal meaninglessness and his brain just couldn't process it. He was supposed to be strong, Zarakith said. Physical strength doesn't help with mental problems. It's like trying to fix a computer with a hammer. Jake moved to another crystal, this one showing a Mentari sage collapsed on the floor. And this one, telepaths are used to reading thoughts and emotions from other people. You probably flooded him with 10,000 years of your own emotions all at once. I wanted him to understand, but you can't download that much experience into someone's brain and expect them to stay sane. It's like trying to pour an ocean into a coffee cup. Jake walked back to the center of the chamber and sat down again, facing Zarakith. Look, he said, I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong. You want to find someone who can understand you, that's normal. Everyone needs someone to talk to. But your method is, well, it's kind of like trying to make friends by hitting people. With a truck. For the first time since he had entered the chamber, Zarakith laughed. It was a strange sound, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. A truck, she repeated. Yes, I suppose it is rather like that. The crystals around her began to pulse in a different rhythm, slower and more peaceful. Jake felt some of the tension leave the air. So here's my question, Jake continued. Instead of testing people to see if they can handle your whole life, story at once, why don't you just talk to them, start small, get to know them, let them get to know you? I do not understand. Well, for example, what's your favorite color? Zarakith stared at him. My favorite color? Yeah. Simple question. Everyone has preferences. I have not thought about preferences in many centuries. Colors are simply wavelengths of light. But some wavelengths probably look nicer to you than others, right? Zarakith was quiet for a long moment, thinking. I suppose I have always been drawn to the color of starlight, not the harsh white of young stars, but the gentle gold of older ones. That's nice, Jake said. I like blue myself, the color of Earth's sky. You ask such strange questions, Zarakith said. Not strange, just normal. This is how people get to know each other. Small things first, then bigger things later. Jake leaned back, getting comfortable. Want to know something funny? I was expecting some kind of monster in here or maybe a death trap. Instead, I find someone who's just really, really lonely and doesn't know how to make friends. I am not trying to make friends, Zarakith said, but her voice was uncertain. Aren't you? What else would you call it when you're looking for someone who can understand you? The crystals around them began to dim slightly. The chamber felt warmer somehow, less alien and threatening. I had not considered, Zarakith began, then stopped. Considered what? That loneliness might be a simple problem with a simple solution. Jake smiled. Most problems are simpler than they look. The trick is breaking them down into pieces you can actually. As the hours passed, Jake learned more about Zarakith than anyone had in 10,000 years. Her people, the Void Walkers, had been ancient when humans were still living in caves. They could step between dimensions, see across time, and touch the fundamental forces that held the universe together. But with great power came great sorrow. They lived long enough to watch everything they cared about fade away. We tried to help younger species, Zarakith explained. They were still sitting facing each other in the center of the chamber, but now the floating crystals had arranged themselves in a gentle circle around them, like a campfire made of light. We shared our knowledge, taught them science and art, and philosophy, but in the end, they all died anyway. How long do humans live compared to your people? Jake asked. Your species lives perhaps 80 of your years. Mine lived for millions. Jake whistled softly. No wonder you're having trouble. That's like, imagine if you lived for one day, and you were trying to make friends with creatures that lived for 1 second. Every time you started to get to know them, they'd be gone. Yes, Zarakith said, and for the first time her voice carried real sadness instead of cosmic despair. That is exactly what it was like. So what happened to the rest of your people? They grew tired of watching civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach, tired of forming attachments that always ended in loss. One by one, they chose to fade, to let their consciousness dissolve back into the void. But you didn't. I could not. I kept thinking that there must be some purpose to it all, some reason why we had lived so long, seen so much. I thought if I could find just one being who could understand, who could carry the knowledge forward. Jake nodded. You'd have someone to pass the torch to. Pass the torch? It's a human expression, like in a relay race. You run your part, then you give the torch to the next runner and they continue the race. You were looking for someone to continue your people's race. Zarakith considered this. Yes, that is exactly what I was seeking. But you were testing people wrong. You were trying to download your entire life experience into their heads all at once. That's not how humans learn. We learn gradually, piece by piece. To demonstrate, Jake started telling Zarakith about his own life. Not the big cosmic stuff, but the small human details. Growing up on New Terra, where the sky was pink instead of blue because of the atmosphere. Learning to fix machines from his father, who had been a maintenance worker at the spaceport. The day his father died in a mining accident, and how Jake had decided to become an engineer so he could make machines safer. Your father died young, Zarakith observed. Yeah, I was 22. Old enough to understand what death meant, but young enough for it to hurt really bad. Jake's voice was quiet, but you know what? Even though he's gone, the things he taught me are still here. The way he showed me how to think through problems, how to be patient with broken things, how to never give up, that's all still alive. I do not understand. Humans don't live very long, but we're good at passing things on. Knowledge, values, stories. My dad died, but the important parts of him are still here in me. And when I die, I'll pass them on to someone else. Zarakith was quiet for a long time. The crystals around them pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. You are saying that even short-lived beings can achieve a form of immortality? Sort of. Not the person, but the ideas. The things that matter. Jake gestured around the chamber. Look at what you're doing here. You're trying to pass on everything your people learned. That's immortality too, just a different kind. But everyone I share it with dies. Because you're doing it wrong. Here, let me show you something. Jake pulled out his portable toolkit and opened it on the floor between them. Inside were wrenches, screwdrivers, a small welding torch, and various other implements. See this wrench? My father gave it to me. It's not special. You can buy one just like it in any tool shop. But this specific wrench has been fixing things for 40 years. First my father used it, now I use it. Someday maybe my nephew will use it. He picked up the wrench and turned it over in his hands. The metal doesn't remember my father, but every time I use this tool, I remember what he taught me about fixing things. The tool carries the memory forward. You are suggesting that knowledge can be preserved without preserving the original mind? Exactly. You don't need to find someone who can hold 10,000 years of memories. You need to find people who can understand the important ideas and pass them on to others. Zarakith reached out and touched the wrench with one long finger. Where she touched it, the metal gleamed brighter for a moment. This is a form of teaching I had not considered. It's how humans have always done it. We're not smart enough or long-lived enough to figure everything out on our own. So we build on what the people before us learned. My father built on what his father learned. I'm building on what my father learned. And so on. But how do you bear the sadness of loss? Jake thought about this carefully. It was the heart of Zarakith's problem. How do you keep caring about things when you know they won't last forever? We accept that things end, he said finally. But we also believe that the ending doesn't make them meaningless. My father's life mattered because of what he did while he was alive, not because of how long he lived. I do not understand how you can find meaning in temporary things. Because the fact that they're temporary makes them more precious, not less. Jake smiled. If my father had lived forever, would the time I spent with him have been as special? If humans lived for millions of years, would we work as hard to make each day count? Zarakith was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. You are saying that mortality gives life meaning. I'm saying that knowing something won't last forever makes you appreciate it more while you have it. Around them, the chamber continued to change. The walls now showed images, not the cosmic vistas of Void Walker history, but simple scenes from human life. Children playing in a park, workers building a house together, an old woman teaching a young girl to cook. Your species has something mine lost, Zarakith said, watching the images. Hope. Hope? We lived so long that we began to see patterns. Civilizations rising and falling, stars being born and dying, the universe itself slowly cooling toward emptiness. We saw the end of everything, and it made us forget that the middle parts could still be beautiful. Jake nodded. That's the problem with thinking too big. You miss all the good stuff happening right in front of you. Show me, Zarakith said suddenly. Show you what? How you find meaning in small things. How you stay hopeful when you know everything is temporary. Jake looked around the chamber. The floating crystals were still there, but they no longer looked threatening. Instead, they reminded him of stars, distant but beautiful. Okay, he said, but I'm going to do it the human way. No downloading cosmic knowledge into your brain, just talking. He started with simple things. The satisfaction of fixing a broken machine and seeing it work again. The taste of real coffee after weeks of synthetic substitutes. The way his sister laughed when she was truly happy. The excitement in his nephew's eyes when Jake showed him how gears worked. These are all temporary pleasures, Zarakith pointed out. Yes, but they happen over and over again. Every day there are new machines to fix, new problems to solve, new moments of happiness to find. You don't need eternal happiness. You just need enough small happinesses to fill up your life. As Jake talked, something amazing happened. The crushing weight of cosmic loneliness that filled the chamber began to lift. Not because the universe had become less vast or less empty, but because Jake was showing Zarakith how to focus on the parts that weren't empty. Your people, Jake said. They got so focused on the big picture that they forgot to enjoy the small pictures. But humans are good at small pictures. We're good at finding happiness in temporary things. And this prevents you from despair? Sometimes we get sad anyway. When my father died, I was pretty messed up for a while. But eventually, I remembered all the good times we had together. And I realized that being sad about losing him was just proof of how much those good times meant to me. Zarakith was quiet, for a long time processing this idea. Finally, she spoke. I have been trying to find someone who could bear the weight of cosmic knowledge, but perhaps what I really need is someone who can teach me to find joy in small knowledge. Now you're getting it, Jake said with a grin. But I still do not understand how you maintain hope when you know that entropy will eventually claim everything. Because entropy is really slow and life is really persistent. Sure, the universe will end someday, but that's so far in the future that it might as well be forever. In the meantime, there's a lot of good stuff happening. Jake gestured to the images on the walls around them. Look at all that. Humans learning, creating, helping each other, falling in love, having kids, building things. That's all happening right now while we're sitting here talking. Tomorrow there will be more of it. Next year, even more. And when your species dies, out. Then maybe another species will take over and find their own ways to create meaning. Or maybe the universe will come up with something completely new that we can't even imagine. The point is, we don't have to solve everything. We just have to do our part and trust. When the first light of dawn touched the sensors outside the chamber, the black door began to glow. Jake had been awake all night, but he didn't feel tired. Instead, he felt energized, like he had just solved the biggest puzzle of his life. "Time's up," he said to Zarakith. She was sitting in the same cross-legged position, but everything else about her had changed. Her skin no longer flowed like liquid. It looked almost solid, almost human. Her black eyes now reflected light instead of absorbing it. The floating crystals around them had settled into gentle patterns, their harsh pulsing replaced by a steady, peaceful glow. "I do not want you to leave," she said quietly. "I have to. That was the deal. One night. But this doesn't have to be goodbye." Jake stood up and brushed dust off his clothes. His tool belt was still around his waist, his flashlight still clipped to his pocket. He looked exactly the same as when he had entered 12 hours ago, but he felt different. Like he had just made a friend who would change his life. "What will you do now?" Zarakith asked. "Go back to my crew, finish our business here, head home to New Terra, same as always." Jake paused at the door, which was beginning to unseal itself. "What will you do?" I think I will try your suggestion. Start small. Perhaps I will speak with Station Administrator Kexalon about establishing a teaching center here. That's a great idea. And remember, you don't have to do everything at once. Take your time. Find a few students who are interested in learning, not in getting rich or famous. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Beyond it, Jake could see crowds of beings waiting in the corridor. Camera lights flashed. He could hear excited voices speaking in dozens of languages. "Jake," Zarakith called as he stepped toward the door. He turned back. How do I thank someone for saving me?" Jake grinned. "You don't have to thank me. Just remember what we talked about. Focus on the small stuff. Find the good parts. And if you ever need someone to talk to..." He pulled a small communicator from his tool belt and tossed it to her. "That's my contact information. Works anywhere in the galaxy. You would want to speak with me again?" "Of course. That's what friends do." With that, Jake Morrison walked out of the chamber that had killed 63 previous challengers. He was grinning from ear to ear. The crowd in the corridor went silent. Camera operators stopped filming. Betting terminals throughout the station crashed as algorithms tried to process the impossible. Someone had survived the trial night. Station Administrator Kexalon was the first to recover from the shock. She scuttled forward on her 8 legs, medical scanners in all 4 hands. "Mr. Morrison, are you injured? Are you actually alive?" "I'm fine," Jake said, still grinning. "Better than fine, actually. That was probably the most interesting conversation I've ever had." "Conversation?" Kexalon's multiple eyes blinked in confusion. "You talked with her?" "Most of the night. Turns out she's really lonely and doesn't know how to make friends. We worked through some stuff." Danny and Lisa pushed through the crowd, both looking like they had seen a ghost. "Jake?" Lisa grabbed his arm and started checking him for injuries. "Are you okay? Are you hurt? Did she do something to your mind?" "I'm fine, Lisa, really. Actually, I feel pretty good." Danny was staring at the door behind Jake. What happened in there? We heard voices sometimes, but we couldn't make out words. Just talking. Problem solving. You know me. I see something broken, I try to fix it. You fixed Zarakith? Kexalon asked, her voice full of disbelief. I wouldn't say fixed. More like, helped her figure out a different approach to her problem. The crowd was getting louder now as word spread through the station. Jake could hear beings calling out questions in languages he didn't recognize. Someone was shouting odds for betting pools. A news reporter was trying to push through the crowd with a camera crew. We should get out of here, Danny said, looking nervous at all the attention. As they started to move through the crowd, a deep voice boomed over the noise. Human. Everyone turned. Commander Veltar, the Krillian military attaché, was pushing through the crowd. He was huge, 8 feet tall and covered in natural armor that gleamed under the corridor lights. His clawed hands could have crushed Jake's head like an egg. You survived what killed my greatest warrior, Veltar growled, stopping in front of Jake. How? Jake looked up at the massive alien. I listened to her instead of trying to fight her. Listened? Yeah. Turns out the trial wasn't about being strong enough to survive something. It was about being willing to help someone who was hurting. Veltar stared down at Jake for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he began to laugh. A sound like rocks grinding together. The mighty Krill Empire sends its greatest warrior to face a cosmic test of strength, he rumbled. And a human engineer solves it by listening. Sometimes the simplest approach is the best one, Jake said with a shrug. Other voices began calling out from the crowd. What was she like? What did you see in there? What about the Void Walker technology? Jake held up his hands for quiet. Look, I know everyone's curious, but I'm not going to share the details of a private conversation. That's between me and her. As for the technology, he paused, thinking. I think she's got something better in mind than just handing out weapons and gadgets. What do you mean? Called out a voice from the crowd. She's thinking about teaching, sharing knowledge instead of just testing people. If you're interested in learning from her, you should talk to Station Administrator Kexalon. Kexalon's eyes went wide. She wants to establish an educational program? That's what we talked about. But you'll have to work out the details with her. As Jake and his crew finally pushed through the crowd and headed for the elevators, more questions followed them. How did you know what to do? What makes humans different? Will you try it again? Jake answered the last question over his shoulder as the elevator doors closed. Once was enough. But I'm glad I did it. Back in their rooms, Danny and Lisa peppered Jake with questions. They wanted to know everything. What the chamber looked like. What Zarakith had said. How he had survived. When so many others had died. The others were trying to pass a test, Jake explained. They thought they had to prove they were strong enough or smart enough to handle whatever she threw at them. But there was no test. She was just lonely. Really, really lonely. So you talked to her about loneliness, Lisa asked. I talked to her about being human, about how we deal with problems, how we find meaning in temporary things, how we help each other when things get tough. Stuff like that. And that saved your life? Jake thought about it. I think it saved hers too. She's been stuck for 10,000 years, trying to find someone who could understand her. But she was going about it wrong. Instead of trying to download her entire experience into someone's head, she needed to learn how to connect with people on a smaller scale. Danny shook his head in amazement. So the deadliest challenge in the galaxy was actually just someone who needed a friend. Pretty much. Over the next few days, word of Jake's survival spread throughout the galaxy. News ships arrived at Kepler Station, bringing reporters from every major species. Scientists wanted to study him. Military leaders wanted to recruit him. Merchants offered him fortunes for the secret of surviving the trial night. Jake turned them all down. He finished his mining contracts, said goodbye to his new friend Zarakith, and prepared to head home to New Terra. On their last day at the station, Kexalon invited them to lunch in her office. She looked excited in the way that spider-like beings could look excited. Zarakith has agreed to establish the Voidwalker Institute for Interspecies Understanding, she announced. We're converting 3 entire levels of the station into classrooms and research facilities. She'll start with small groups, maybe 10 students at a time, teaching them about Voidwalker science and philosophy. That's great, Jake said. I think she'll be good at it once she gets used to the idea. She asked me to give you this, Kexalon said, handing Jake a small crystal. It was warm to the touch and seemed to glow with inner light. She says it contains some basic Voidwalker knowledge, nothing dangerous or overwhelming, just things that might be useful for an engineer. Jake clipped the crystal to his tool belt, next to his father's wrench. Thanks. She also wanted me to tell you that you have a standing invitation to visit anytime. As a friend, not as a student. I might take her up on that someday. When the New Frontier finally left Kepler Station, Jake stood at the observation window, watching it shrink into the distance. Behind him, Danny was plotting their course home while Lisa caught up on news from the colonies. Any regrets? Danny asked without looking up from his navigation console. None, Jake said, although I have to admit fixing mining equipment is going to seem pretty boring after this. You saved someone's life, Lisa said. That's not boring. I didn't save her life. I just helped her remember how to live it. Jake touched the crystal on his tool belt. Somehow he knew this wasn't the end of his adventures. Word was already spreading through the galaxy about the human who had survived the trial night. Not through strength or cunning, but through compassion and common sense. Other beings would want to meet him, to understand what made humans different. Some would want to learn from human approaches to problem solving. Others might need help with problems of